Welcome to the University of California, San Francisco Sports Medicine Podcast, featuring Dr. Nirav Pandya, Dr. Brian Feeley, and Dr. Drew Lansdowne, discussing hot topics in sports medicine and society. We hope you enjoy our podcast and look forward to hearing from you.
All right, welcome to this week's edition of 6 to 8 Weeks. We're joined by an award-winning author and journalist, Michael Hitzlik. He is a writer for the L.A. Times. He is also a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, which makes him the highest award winner that has been on this podcast before, so congratulations. Michael is a writer for the Los Angeles Times. He has written many books. He has a new book coming out in the next few months. He won his Pulitzer Prize in 1999 for exposing corruption in the entertainment industry, which seems appropriate a day after there was a little bit of drama at the Oscars. He was a graduate of Colgate University and Columbia University, and obviously in Southern California, he works for the LA Times. He's joined with us today to talk a little bit about stem cells, which for Nirav and I, we get a lot of questions from patients about the efficacies, safety, but really, how can we be using stem cells more? So thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to do it.
All right, so my first question for you, in case people decide that this is just too much really good information, is you've done some really good reporting on the dangers of the current stem cell treatments over the last 5 years. Can you summarize what you found out about the negative outcomes for individuals?
Sure. I've been covering this field really for several years from various different standpoints. I've been covering CIRM, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, since its inception. In fact, before its inception, I started covering that issue when Proposition 71 was actually drafted and then put before the voters. But I've also been covering the proliferation of basically bogus clinics hawking stem cell treatments and therapies for the vast range of conditions, for none of which these treatments have been scientifically validated, proven, or even in many cases plausible. As we know, these are clinics that are out there that are telling customers or patients that they can treat everything from musculoskeletal treatments to spinal injuries, to diabetes and Alzheimer's, Parkinsonisms, multiple sclerosis, just everything that can ail you, and basically my finding is they have been pitched to the most desperate patients, those who've tried everything else, or maybe been told that their conditions are inoperable or even terminal, and the customers are being exploited. I've covered clinics that charge up to $15,000 per treatment, and often they say, well, you need more than one treatment. And of course, for the patients, over anything other than maybe the short-term placebo effect, they get no gain from this. I've covered the FDA's efforts to shut this field down. I don't think the FDA has done nearly enough, and it hasn't really been explicit enough about the dangers or aggressive enough. And I've covered lawsuits and other actions against these. So that's basically the whole field. And my general finding or general impression from my research is that these clinics are basically hawking unproven, dangerous therapies. They should be shut down, and they are undermining the work that legitimate researchers such as yourself do, because they are essentially encouraging people to think that there's a miracle cure out there and are glossing over the fact that science takes time, and medical research takes time. And we're not at the end of that road for stem cell treatment at this point.
Right. Now, as a non-medical person, when someone says stem cell therapy, what kind of initially pops into your mind in terms of that kind of grab-all term?
Yeah, well, I am a non-medical person, but I've done the research. So when I basically hear stem cell treatment coming from a non-academic or a non-legitimate clinic, I immediately think charlatan. I think that these are that the people who are talking about this, who don't have basically solid academic protocol that they're working on, they are basically just exploiting. And I think I think that's sort of a tragedy, because if I think this way, given what I know, then basically, as I said, that's undermining the legitimate research that's being done, because it's essentially smearing legitimate researchers by encouraging people to think that, as I said, it's a miracle cure.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that comes back over and over, and even when you look at ads in the 1800s, are the idea that there's this miracle cure for X, Y, or Z. And it's shocking, as we've learned more and more about science, that our knee-jerk reaction is to think something like a stem cell or a pill or something is just a miracle cure. One of the things that we deal with in sports medicine is athletes that say they went someplace, got this therapy, or it's added into the news. Tiger Woods got a little bit of PRP. So one of the ones that you brought up was the article with Jack Nicklaus, or the presentation with Jack Nicklaus, and then Sanjay Gupta, who I would say probably provided 70% of my knowledge on coronavirus. Are you surprised that even reputable news branches like CNN end up using these sort of celebrities to promote
this? Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. I mean, this is CNN, like most other news sources, has a promotional element to it, and I think that they're inclined, as we all are, speaking as a newspaper journalist, inclined, if we can, to be optimistic, and to offer hope to our readers in cases where the evidence is at best equivocal. Now, of course, in this case, I think the evidence is less than equivocal. But yeah, what I wrote about, this was in 2018, was a feature story that CNN published that came out of a medical conference at the Vatican, at which Jack Nicklaus gave a little talk about his experience with stem cells, and he basically said that he had a stem cell injection, and it was this autologous procedure where fat cells were taken from his body by liposuction. They were treated in some mysterious way and then re-injected to the site of a muscular or a skeletal muscular injury. And he said his condition improved, that he was able to play golf again, what have you. Now, what he also said that sort of got glossed over was that he was going in for another treatment, the same treatment. So he was doing it again, which suggests that maybe it didn't take to the great degree that he claimed. He was, in the CNN feature, he was interviewed by Sanjay Gupta, and Gupta was basically, it was no pushback from Gupta on scientific grounds. He was basically taking Nicklaus at the level of his own claims, which is something that happens a lot in television. And my take on it, and I wrote at length about this in my column, is that it was bad enough for Jack Nicklaus to be basically promoting this treatment that has no scientific no known scientific validity. But it may have been even worse for Gupta to do so, because he is known and seen by the public as a credible source of medical research, a credible scientist. And people might or might not believe that Jack Nicklaus had the experience that he had, but they're going to tend to believe Gupta. And Gupta, I thought, was just extremely incautious and unskeptical about this. I also pointed out that the whole context of this encounter was Nicholas speaking up for some people who are trying to profit from stem cell research. They've come up with a medical device that they say can help separate out the stem cells from lipocells. They're trying to get FDA approval for it. This was all really part of a commercial promotion, and Nicholas had financial connections to all these people. And of course, that was not disclosed at all in the piece, but it was out there in public disclosures, which I basically tracked down and published. So this was really an example of the way that these therapies get promoted to the unwary, and I thought it was really shameful.
No, that's an excellent point. I definitely agree. The issue with disclosures isn't talked about enough in medicine as well, too. A lot of people will hear about what's going on or research is being published, and then they're not looking to see where the financial interest lies. So absolutely, I think that's a critical point. And kind of talking a little bit more about one of your more recent articles, you brought up the proliferation of stem cell clinics over the past 10 years, even with all this tremendous amount of crackdown. Are you surprised that as there's been increasing enforcement and cracking down on these clinics, that you've actually seen an increase in the number of them kind of promoting these types of therapies?
I'm not really surprised. I mean, charlatans and mountebanks out there are always on the lookout for ways to profit. What we've seen not only is not only the proliferation of clinics, but the proliferation of claims for their treatments. I've certainly seen a lot of promoters claiming that they can treat or even cure COVID-19. I think that was almost inevitable. And one of the reasons that we see this sort of proliferation is that the regulation is really spotty, to the point that it's effectively indistinguishable from non-regulation. The FDA has been explicit. If you go on the FDA website, you'll find their warnings about how they've approved none of these treatments. In fact, they've approved just one treatment using stem cells, and it's cells from umbilical blood that they've approved for treatment of basically blood conditions, nothing else. And certainly not these lipo-derived autologous treatments. In terms of other regulation, the medical regulation is in the hands of the states, and it's invariably very spotty. In our state, California, the Medical Board of California, which is supposed to be regulating doctors, really doesn't take action unless it gets a complaint, usually from a patient. It doesn't do anything proactively, even though California is one of the epicenters of this sort of commercial activity. And sad to say, California may be, doing more than anybody else, and since it's doing basically nothing, that's sad commentary. This is a field in which it's very easy to misrepresent the state of the science. It's easy to misrepresent the kind of approvals that scientific treatments and devices are supposed to have from the Food and Drug Administration. So basically, it's a jungle out there in a Wild West. And over the years that I've been covering this, I've seen some effort by the FDA to crack down, but it has not really been consistent or effective.
And one thing that I feel is interesting is that as patients in general are much more savvy. I mean, I think even over the past 10 to 15 years, I feel that patients do their own research and have more information. And you would figure, at least I would feel, that they would see that there's a, potentially a lack of evidence. It seems that this is proliferating even when there's not good evidence about it. Do you feel that perhaps some of this is about a mistrust of the kind of the traditional medical community that's led to proliferation of this, even in the absence of evidence? Like, where do you think the consumer driven part of this is coming from in an increasingly, more well-read, more educated society about these things?
Yeah, well, of course, there's more mistrust among the public of all of our institutions, and scientific institutions have been basically the victim of that just as much as our political and economic institutions have been. So yeah, we've seen a lot of that. And when you talk about how people have much more access to information and much more inclined to do their own research, I think that's a double-edged sword. And I think as clinicians yourself, you probably see that patients come in and they say, and you say, look, here's a clinician will say, here's our recommendation, here's your condition, here's what we know about it, here's what we think we can do. And a patient will say, well, gee, I just read somewhere, maybe even had read something in a legitimate scientific or technical journal. Why can't you do that for me? Or I want to try this, or what have you. So the public has a lot more access to good information, but they also have a lot more access to bad information. And there's just an enormous amount of bad information out there that really is aimed at taking advantage of people who think they're doing good research, but just are not doing enough. And certainly I've seen this with the pandemic, just that the torrent, the tsunami of bad information that's out there is stunning.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one of the things I didn't realize until recently is that you can register any trial on clinicaltrials.gov, which gives an air of legitimacy to it. But if I'm a stem cell clinic, I can essentially tell patients, I'm going to enroll you in this study. You're still going to have to pay the full price, but we will track outcomes. You don't actually then have to track outcomes after you've enrolled that study. You just withdraw it a few years later. And while there are some really good studies going on, obviously, that go through that, it just means that you have registered a trial. It doesn't add an air of legitimacy, but when you look at it, it looks like it's legitimate. Have you thought about reporting on these outcomes or how this process could be regulated any differently?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it, and I think I've alluded to it or mentioned it or even reported on it at one point or another. I've written so many columns about this field that I can't always. I have to go back and reread them sometimes when I'm preparing the next one to remember if I've covered this. Clinicaltrials.gov, which is this sort of public clearinghouse, where it's really just a roster of trials that, as you said, anyone can register a trial. I think it's been a problem because it looks like some sort of official government imprimatur to the trial that's listed, when in fact it's nothing of the kind. And if you go on clinicaltrials.gov, you'll see, I think when you first open the website, a warning that says listing here is not an endorsement of anything, really. So I think, and clinicaltrials.gov is hosted, I think, by HHS or maybe by the National Institutes of Health. I can't remember offhand exactly who the sponsoring agency is, but I think whoever that is, has a greater responsibility to make sure that a listing on that website is not promoted by the listers as anything like an endorsement, and not taken by the public as an endorsement. I think there are a few things that can be done. I mean, I understand the value and utility of having a roster, a public listing like this, because some of the information is valuable. I mean, you can go on it, you can search by condition, you can search by medicine or device. and find all of the trials that have been scheduled. But and if it's legitimate, you'll see, what their timing is, what their intermediate outcome points are, what their endpoints are, how many people they're recruiting, what the standards are, who's not eligible and who is eligible. So there's a lot of valuable information. But when we're talking about the exploitation of this website by non-legitimate clinics, I think really the sponsors need to be more aggressive about policing it. I mean, I can think of a few things that they could require. If a trial is being conducted and its patient pays, I think that probably shouldn't be permitted on this website, because that's a red flag. If somebody's out there, supposedly conducting a trial, but you, the patient, have to pay for the treatment, that does not really conform to my image of what a legitimate clinical trial is. I think there should be more policing of the institutional review board claims. Every clinical trial, as you know, needs to be approved by the review board at your institution. And we may debate how rigorous or non-rigorous those are, but I think at UC San Francisco, I'm sure, there's no messing around with the IRB. You really have to show your stuff. But I've certainly seen a lot of cases where the supposed IRB, that these are the same people as the promoters of the trial. It's just a smokescreen. So I think, any evidence that that's going on, that should bar the trial from being published. And then, I don't know how to be more explicit than clinicaltrials.gov is about the fact that this is being on that website is not an endorsement. I think any clinic that claims that, that says, we're FDA approved because, the FDA has allowed this clinical trial to be listed, that they should be barred from it. So there needs to be a lot more regulation of this instrument that's being used to basically fool the public.
And our final question for you, and want to respect your time, over the, we've seen stem cells kind of two different kind of trends. You've got one side, stem cells really bad, another side, stem cells cure everything. Do you feel that over the next 5 to 10 years, this conversation is going to become more nuanced, or do you feel that we're going to kind of have another, proliferation of, people hawking these treatments without evidence, and then another group trying to fight it, and kind of no happy medium develop between the two groups?
Yeah, I think the nuances are emerging even as we speak. I mean, I think CIRM, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, which is funded by California taxpayers to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. I think, leaving aside that there's a basic tension within CIRM between trying to show progress in the research they funded and being cautious about claims. But after all, CIRM was born with a really extreme and I think implausible claim that it was going to produce cures in a finite period, really. And as I wrote at the time, that's just not the way science works, especially a novel science, as this was much more in when Proposition 71 was voted. So I think we are seeing more discussion about the potential of stem cells as potential, and I think that's valuable and important, because we do need to make sure the public understands that there is tremendous potential in this field, but we are working toward realizing it. And we're not entirely there yet. I mean, it's obviously we're closer on some things than we are on others, and there are some conditions which I think there's now some doubt that they'll ever be addressable by stem cells. So I think we're seeing more in that. I think we do want to see more nuance, and it's a challenge to continue to do that. And we're always going to be fighting against these charlatans who are taking advantage of the public image of stem cells to sell. These patients are all desperate for one reason or another. Either they can't, they've been told their condition is just incurable or untreatable or even terminal, or maybe they can't get insurance coverage, and of course they can't get insurance coverage for these unvalidated treatments. But there's a lot of people out there who are at the point where they will try anything, and I think the only way to address that is to try to treat it at the source, which is these clinics, and there just needs to be much more aggressive regulation at the state level and at the federal level to try to stamp it out.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for your time. I think that was incredibly insightful. I learned stuff, even in addition to reading your articles. It made me had to up my subscription to the LA Times, which I hadn't had since I finished residency in 2008. So on behalf of Nirav, Drew, and myself, we greatly appreciate it. Thank you for the information, and have a great day.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the work you do. I know that you're trying to really realize the potential of these treatments, and I respect that.
Great.